Okay, so in Tisha B'Av, we're very limited of what we're allowed to learn. And one of the things we're allowed to learn is the Gemara in Masechet Gitin on Nun Hey Amud Bet 55b. And this Gemara discusses why various episodes that happened in the time of the destruction of preceding the time of the destruction of the second Bet HaMikdash. We know that we read in the Haftarah last week, Parashat Devarim, Haftarah Chazon. And in that Haftarah, we learn the reasons why the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed. And in fact, that Haftarah is Chazon. It says Chazon Yishayahu ben Amos, and it mentions 4 kings. And the reason those 4 kings are mentioned is to tell you this Chazon happened over and over and over again, which means Yishayahu went not just once. He didn't just give this prophecy once. He gave this prophecy multiple times in the lives of those 4 kings. Okay? So that is a description of the destruction of the first Bet HaMikdash, the factors that preceded, that caused the destruction. We know the Gemara tells us that the 3 reasons why the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed: Gilu Arayot, which is adultery; Shvichut Amim, which is murder; and Avodah Zarah, which is idol worship. And then the Gemara says, but the second Bet HaMikdash, we had Torah, we had Chachamim, we had all kinds of, we had people doing mitzvot and ma'asim tovim. So why was the second Bet HaMikdash destroyed? And we know the reason for the second Bet HaMikdash destruction was Sinat Hinam. And there's probably no Gemara that illustrates the concept of Sinat Hinam better than this Gemara. Okay, so let's look inside. It says, if we look at the Gemara, it's from the wide lines in the bottom on page 55b, from the 2 dots. It says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Mai dichtiv. What does it mean when it's written? Ashrei Adam mevahed tamid umakshe libo yipol bera'ah. Fortunate is the man that always fears the consequences of his actions, right? And that he that hardens his heart will come to harm, which we understand. This is meaning what? A person should not be, right? Should not be stubborn in making teshuvah when he realizes he makes a mistake, right? And a person that is always fearful, right, of the consequences of his actions will not falter, right? Generally, when people forget for momentarily that there's a dayan, there's a judge, and there's judgment, then allows them to make all kinds of terrible mistakes. So Rabbi Yochanan quotes this pasuk. This pasuk, of course, is from Mishlei, chapter 28. And this pasuk is discussing about maybe these factors would have helped if people would have followed what this pasuk says, and the story wouldn't have been as bad as it was. Okay, now this basically discusses there are 3 episodes which tragedy caused the people to fail because they didn't think about the consequences of their actions. And that's why this pasuk is brought. So the first tragedy that's brought says, Akamsa ubar kamsa charuv Yerushalayim. As a result of the story of the incident of the Maisa with Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Jerusalem was destroyed. Now let's look at these individuals, Kamsa, Bar Kamsa, right? Of course, they may be 2 separate people. One his name is Kamsa and one is Bar Kamsa. But it's also possible that this is actually a father and a son. Bar means son, right? So Kamsa was the father. Bar Kamsa was the son, right? Which will make this whole episode even more tragic. Okay? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says, because of the story of Kamsa Bar Kamsa, Yerushalayim was destroyed. The word haruv means destroyed. Atarnegola utarnegolta charuv tur malka. As a result of the incident involving a rooster and a hen, Har HaMelech was destroyed. Tur Malka is Har HaMelech. What is Har HaMelech? Har HaMelech was a very densely populated area in Yehudah, and this densely populated area was destroyed because of Atar Negola and Atar Negolta. And then we have, as a result, Ashka Derispak Haruv Betar. And as a result of an incident involving the side of a carriage, Betar was destroyed. Betar was also a very, very large city with immense population, and Betar was destroyed about 52 years after the Romans destroyed Yerushalayim. And this is why we have the 4th Beracha, Birkat HaMazon, because of the miracle that happened that when they were allowed to go in and bury the bodies in Betar that were strewn all over the ground, the bodies were not decomposed at all. Okay? This is a tremendous miracle. So now the Gemara is going to discuss the first, the Kamsa or Bar Kamsa. It says over here, Akamsa bar Kamsa charuv Yerushalayim. Because of the story of Kamsa and bar Kamsa, Yerushalayim was destroyed. Okay? Now let's look at this in more details. Dehu Gavra. There was a certain man. It's very interesting that the Talmud does not mention his name. It mentions Kamsa bar Kamsa, but doesn't mention this guy's name. And we'll see this guy, in fact, had a significant role in what was going on as the story unfolds, but his name is not mentioned. And perhaps we can say the reason his name is not mentioned.
Protect him from embarrassment?
No, we don't have to protect him from embarrassment because Kamsa and bar Kamsa, we're not protecting them from embarrassment, right? And if you think about it, right, we'll see later on, only one of these two was at fault. Both of them weren't at fault. It wasn't Kamsa and bar Kamsa who were at fault, at least not directly. So why isn't this person mentioned? This person is not mentioned because obviously as we read the story, we see this person was very, very wealthy. The word Gavra is not just a regular person. This was a personality, a celebrity in Jerusalem. And he had a party, okay? And we'll see what happened with this party. Any person, and if we think about today, there are many people, that parties that happen all the time, that an incident like this could happen at any party. So just like we see the story regarding the Chazon Yeshayahu can apply in multiple different circumstances, right? That's why he said the prophecy over and over and over again. The Gavra here is not important. Why? Because it could happen at any time. Okay? Also comes to teach you another lesson, that no matter how wealthy a person is, unless he makes some type of a contribution that is everlasting, with Torah, mitzvot, and ma'asim tovim, generation or two later, nobody remembers him. His name is unimportant. Right?
The only thing that was known about him is that he was rich.
Right, and that means nothing because the money goes, when the person dies, the money goes to somebody else, and within a very short, so there's lots of rich people, so what? What does that mean? People forget about these rich people. Who, can you tell me who the richest person in the 18th century was? Who was the richest person? Nobody knows, right? We know the richest person in our century is Bill Gates. That's only because he's in our century. Who was the richest person in the previous century? Do you know? We don't know. I don't know. Okay, so it says here, certain man, Hu Gavra, Derahme Kamsa. The word Rahmeh means he loved this individual called Kamsa. They were good friends. They were bosom buddies. Right? Ubal Divave Bar Kamsa. And there was another individual, Bar Kamsa, who he said could have been the son of Kamsa. And this certain man, hated this other person. So one person he loved, his name was Kamsa, and the one he hated was Bar Kamsa. Okay? Avad Seudata. He made a Seudah. He made some type of a banquet. We'll see later on that the rabbis came to the banquet, so one can assume that this banquet maybe was some kind of a banquet of maybe a siyum of Gemara. Who knows? Maybe the banquet had some kind of a connection, because otherwise I'm not sure where the rabbis would come. Anyway, he made a seudah, he made a banquet. Amalei l'sham'eh. He told to his attendant, right? Interesting, the word sham'eh, which means someone who listens. This guy did anything but listen. He didn't listen. He didn't listen carefully, right? He didn't hear very carefully. It's just like when you read the pasuk in the beginning of the Gemara, what does it say? Right? Ashrei adam mefahed tamid u'maksheh libo yipol bera'ah. A person has to listen to what the Torah says. If you don't listen to what the Torah says, the person gets himself in trouble. Just like this guy who didn't listen to what his master told him and caused a tremendous trouble. Zil aiti le kamsa. Go and bring Kamsa to come to me, which means go please invite my bosom, my friend, Kamsa, right? Of course, he didn't tell him not to invite Bar Kamsa because it should have been obvious. He told him, please go invite Kamsa. Azal aite le Bar Kamsa. But this servant made a mistake, a huge mistake, and instead of inviting Kamsa to the party, who was his friend, he invited Bar Kamsa to the party, the son of Kamsa. As the Gemara says, right? Ata ashkehe dahava yativ. Now what's amazing is that Bar Kamsa came to the party. Imagine that. I would assume that Bar Kamsa knew that there was this guy by the name of Kamsa who this person loved, and I'm sure he knew that this guy didn't like him, right? And yet when he receives the invitation to the party, he didn't figure out that maybe it was a mistake, and he decided to come. So let's maybe learn him Kav Zechut. Maybe the possibility is that he maybe felt that Kamsa was, that the Gavra, the person, was trying to make amends by inviting him to the party.
Peace offering.
A peace offering. It's an unusual peace offering because usually the more wealthy a person is, the less likely they're going to admit mistakes in public. Right? And the Gemara doesn't tell us why he hated this guy. It may have been known throughout the whole world that he hated the guy, but we don't know why he hated the guy. So he's going to bring him to a party to make amends in front of all of the rabbis of Yerushalayim and all the important personalities. Who would do something like that? Anyway, so of course what happens? Bar Kamsa comes to the party. Ata ashkehe dehavayativ. And of course when the Gavra, when the person who's throwing the party comes, what does he see? He of course sees Bar Kamsa sitting at the banquet, sitting at the table. Right? Bar Kamsa got an invitation. Why wouldn't he come? Right? Amar le, he said to him, Mikidi dehahu gavra bal devava dehahu gavrahu. He says arrogantly. Why arrogantly? He says ve'ashir ya'ane azot. A person who is wealthy, rich, especially if he's not working on his midot, he's going to answer things in an arrogant kind of way. Right? So what does he say? Publicly. He doesn't go over to him and say, excuse me, you must be mistaken. You know I don't like you. Please leave the party. Then what Bar Kamsa might have done is gotten up and walked out. He would have realized that the Gavra was not trying to make amends, right? That it was a mistake, and he would have walked out. But of course, the Ashir, what does he do? He says, look here, that man is the enemy of that man. How's he talking? Third person about himself. I mean, who does that?
Ultimate sign of arrogance.
Who does that? Talks about himself in the third person? You either have to be one of two options. Really arrogant or really crazy. Those are the only two ways a person will talk in the third person about themselves. And he's speaking about this loudly. Look, which means he's trying to get everybody's attention, which what is he going to do? Not only is he going to ask him to leave the party, but he's going to do it in a way that's going to publicly humiliate his enemy. My bayit hacha, what do you want here? Basically, he says, continue in saying. He says, the rich guy says to Bar Kamsa, what do you want here? Kum puk. Get up, get out. Now, if Bar Kamsa was a good guy, even if he was embarrassed tremendously by this, he would have gotten up and walked out. Right? A person should always do the right thing, even if it's embarrassing to do the right thing. Right? Right? And imagine if a person does a mitzvah and the people make fun of him when he's doing the mitzvah, do you know the kind of reward he has? Because if anything, we know the kavod, the honor a person receives, takes away from the sachar, takes away from the reward of the mitzvah in the future, right? Because kavod is very, very valuable in this world. If someone shows you dishonor when you do a mitzvah, imagine, not only do you get reward for the mitzvah, you get extra reward for the anti-kavod you're receiving for doing the mitzvah. But, of course, Bar Kamsa was not such a good guy. And what does he do? He answers back, Amar le. What does he say? Ho'il v'atai shavkan. Since I have come, meaning I made an effort to come, right? Meaning this guy is also arrogant, right? Who are you? You made an effort to come. You were invited. What kind of effort did you make to come? How hard is it to come to a party? Does the Khatan have to thank all his guests for making an effort to come to his party? It's an effort to come to a party. Maybe you can say it's an effort to go to a funeral. It's not an effort to go to a party, right? Right? If you want to be polite, you might say thank you for coming. You don't specifically mention thank you for the effort you made in coming to the party, right?
Depends if your wife wants you to spend some time with her.
Yeah, that could be. I hear what you're saying. But see, he said, since I have come and I've made an effort in coming, let me stay. Imagine that. This guy basically spoke to him in such an arrogant way, told him to publicly get out, and then he's asking to stay. And he doesn't just ask to stay, he adds something. V'havine lach demeh ma de'achilna v'shatina. And I will give you the price, the worth, the value of whatever I ate and drank. Which means he's trying to make himself look like a big tzaddik. Obviously, he wasn't invited to the party. If a person goes to a seudah and he's not invited to the seudah, it's gezel. He's a thief, right? He's a thief. So what is he saying? You're going to think that I'm a thief because I came to this party? I was invited to this party. But you're going to think I'm a thief? I will pay for what I ate and drank. Now, what's the problem with that? That's passive-aggressive. Why is that passive-aggressive? It's not that passive. It's a little passive. What is he really saying? You cheapskate. I ate and drank. I'll pay for it. Since you're so worried about the money you spent on the amount of food that I ate and drank. So in a way, what is he doing? He's insulting the rich man.
He's completely ignoring the fact that the problem is him, and he's trying to pretend like...
Again, the problem was the servant, the one who made the mistake. Really, the problem is that the fact that these two had this fight, that we don't know what the fight's about, and the Gemara never tells us what the fight was about. Never do we know what the fight was about. Why not? Wasn't that important? Because it was sinat hinam. Like we discussed in the other class I did, what is sinat hinam? You think you have a justified reason for hating your friend. But the question is not what you think. Does God think that reason is justified? Because after 120 years, you go to Shamayim, and Hashem's going to know who you didn't like. You want to at least hope that Hashem's going to agree with you that the reason that you don't like that guy is a legitimate reason. Because if not, that's called hinam, right? The host, Amar Le, the host says to Bar Kamsa, Lo, no, I don't want you to stay. Meaning, I don't accept the fact that you're going to pay me whatever you've eaten and drank. I want you to leave. Amar Le, Bar Kamsa, now what happens? Yehivna lach demeh palga seudatech. Okay, so maybe it's not enough money for you, right? So what I'll do is I'll pay for half of the value of the seudah. We could assume this is a big banquet because all of the dignitaries in Yerushalayim were there. One can imagine if you have a wedding with all the stars of Hollywood coming to that wedding, all the big shots in Jerusalem are coming. You can imagine it was very expensive, right? So he offers him to pay for half of the seudah. Of course, what is he now saying? He's also insulting the rich guy. Once again, what? You think it's money is important? The rich guy would say this, I could do 10 seudot like this, doesn't mean anything to me. But nevertheless, Bar Kamsa is basically egging him on. Amar le lo, the host said, no good. Right? So what does Bar Kamsa then offer? He ups the ante. What does he say? Yehivna lach demeh kula seudatech. I will pay for the entire banquet. So we see from here that Bar Kamsa himself was a very wealthy man. Right? Who's going to make an offer to pay for half the seudah? Who's going to make, because his honor is set. The only person who would do something like that is someone who himself is very, very wealthy. Right? And of course, if he was poor, the Begavra would know he's full of baloney. So obviously, Bar Kamsa could have done this, could have paid. And of course, what happens? He offers him the full amount. Amar le lo, nakte beyadeh ve'ukmeh ve'apkeh. He grabbed a hold of Bar Kamsa with his hand, stood him up, and threw him out. Now, that's unusual. Why is that unusual?
Excessive. I can just continue to tell him to leave.
They didn't leave. So what do you do if you have a party and some uninvited guest comes to the party?
Call the police.
You call the police. Or you speak to one of your servants. Right? He had a servant, right? Remember, he didn't send out the invitations himself. That was beneath him. He sent the servant to go, right? But what did he do? He picked himself with his own 2 hands and physically threw him out of the party. Okay? Any questions?
Yes. One question is, why does the Gemara use a name for bar kamsa just to illustrate the confusion in the name?
I would assume that they're real people. This is a real incident that happened. I don't think this is just a made-up story. But it illustrates a problem.
Right. But by the same logic as the rich guy being called a gavra, why can't the Gemara just leave all the names nameless?
Because it wants to say Kamsa, Bar Kamsa, Charuv Yerushalayim. And the crazy thing is, what did Kamsa do? Let's read the story then, we have to ask that question. What did Kamsa do? Bar Kamsa, we know what he's going to do, what he's going to do right now.
Right.
This isn't the worst.
That's why I say Kamsa
He's just
did
warming
nothing.
up. What?
So Kamsa did nothing?
What did Kamsa do? I don't know. We'll talk
say?
about that. Okay? Let's continue on. It says,
Wait, is it good to turn up the temperature level?
go ahead.
A little bit. Turn it.
Go right ahead. You're cold? Want to borrow my shirt?
It's blowing. It's crazy.
No problem. Turn up. This can keep you awake, otherwise you're going to fall asleep. Okay. What's that? Yeah, no problem.
Here's another. It's a smaller question, but why did Bar Kamsa think that? I mean, honestly, I don't think he thought that it was gonna at his third try it would work. I mean, once he offered half the meal, why would he take the full meal?
He was toying with him.
Right. It wasn't.
And the rich guy saw he was toying with him, so what did he do? He physically threw him out. The story's just warming up. Amar. So now Bar Kamsa is thrown out physically from the party. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Who should he be upset with?
Did I throw him out?
He should be upset with the guy who threw him out. We see Bar Kamsa is not upset with the guy who threw him out.
It's just another example, another sinat chinam. It's like a straight. Like,
What is he upset with? Amar. Bar Kamsa said to himself, Ho'il v'havu yatve rabanan below mahubeh. Since the rabbis were seated at the banquet, right, and did not rebuke him, which means didn't rebuke the Gavra for the way he treated Bar Kamsa, right? Shmamina kani halehu. What he did was acceptable to them. So as he's walking out, the only thing he's thinking about is not how upset he is that this man publicly humiliated him. He's upset that the rabbis who were sitting at the party, who were present, didn't object to the way he was treated. What do you learn from here? First of all, the rabbis were at the party, right?
Generally, I guess that's another sign of both arrogance and sinat chinam, just taking another form after the fact that you got into a fight that you technically caused.
Okay,
Like,
who
take it out on somebody?
who hates rabbis?
That's the highest level.
Who hates rabbis?
No? Well, that's not the
Rich people don't necessarily hate rabbis.
highest. Just saying.
Arrogant people.
Arrogant people don't necessarily hate rabbis. Who hates rabbis? Amei haaretz hate rabbis. Ignoramuses hate rabbis. Especially ignoramuses that are wealthy. Right? They hate rabbis. Okay? So we can maybe learn from here as well that Bar Kamsa was not learned. He was wealthy, but not learned. Okay? Certainly we could say the Gavra is a problem, right? Why? We could say the Gavra for sure is a Rasha. Why is he a Rasha?
He doesn't have a valid reason.
You humiliated someone in public. It's kamo shlichut damim.
Okay, fine, good. What else?
That's not a valid point to bring up.
What's that
If
about?
this guy embarrassed me in public, And the 3 rabbis were
We're going to get to that in a second. But first, why is his hatred directed at the rabbis? That he may have a legitimate gripe against the fact that the rabbis didn't speak up.
It says that he hates.
He walks out of this party after being publicly humiliated, and the only thing he says to himself is the rabbis were there, they didn't say anything, they must agree with this. Right? He's not saying how upset he is how he was treated, and the rabbis were there and didn't do anything about it.
He's also not giving them.
He's only is upset with the rabbis. Only upset with the rabbis. Okay? So we know that the rabbis were there, right? I'd like to think that the Seudah was a Seudat mitzvah, some type of a, why would the rabbis be there if it wasn't a Seudat mitzvah? But we have another problem. What's the other problem?
Why didn't the rabbi speak up?
Why didn't the rabbi speak up?
I read in the notes that it was like a very powerful person, and in that case, I didn't really get why it made much of a difference, but
Why didn't the rabbi speak up?
maybe it's not the right, maybe don't speak up in that kind of situation.
They shouldn't speak up in that kind of situation when someone is being publicly humiliated.
He was the balabos was there.
Okay, but the rabbis, aren't they supposed to be fearless? Aren't the rabbis supposed to be fearless?
Well, are they, let me ask you a question, are they exempt in this case or not?
What was the pasuk Rabbi Yochanan started with? Ashrei Adam mefahed tamid. Right? Ashrei, happy, lucky, right? Praiseworthy, fortunate, is the man who is always afraid. Afraid of what?
The consequences of his actions.
Good. Or right. A person has to have Yirat Shamayim. And clearly over here, maybe one can say that the rabbis were more afraid of the Baal Gav, the Gavra, the person who was the party, the person who was the host of the party, than they were afraid of Hashem. Because they have a duty, they have an obligation. They have an obligation to, I have to answer this, hold on a second.